Welcome to the Spool podcast. Unwind with Dr. Nils Roemer, Dean of the Bass School at UT Dallas. Here is Dr. Nils Roemer and Scott Farber.
Good morning, man. How are you?
Good morning. How are you doing?
Real good. Well, we got a lot to talk about today, so we're going to just delve in. Every time it's something different, and I have a lot of notes, and of course, we'll never get to them because you're going to take us in
chatty while at it.
That's right. You're going to take us to many different directions. So I was researching. I found that UTD in 1961 was just a research center, not just, but a research center for TI.
It was a research center at the time. If you look just behind us, things looked a little different around here. It was just a wide open field with one simple building in the middle. That's how it began with Texas Instrument, creating this research lab. And then the next kind of bigger step in our university's history is 1969, when Texas Instrument bequeaths this essentially to the UT system. And at the same time, it becomes then the University of Texas at Dallas.
And then I was surprised to find out it was 1990 when it became a four-year school and you had freshmen for the first time, or was that even later?
No, it was exactly when you did your homework.
Okay.
You got this right. So in lots of ways, the growth really, accelerated really within the last 20 or 30 years, whereas at the beginning we were a graduate university for graduate studies, and became a full, university with undergraduate and graduate students only in the 1990s.
Now, let me ask you, I saw that you added the word humanities. The School of Art and Humanities added in technology in 2022. What was that? Why weren't they always together?
Well, the school itself maybe just was part of the founding schools of 1975. So when all of the major schools on campus were created, Arts and Humanities was created as well. But then within Arts and Humanities in the late 90s, early 21st century emerged like a cluster of individuals who became increasingly interested in initially technology, science, and humanities, and then the kind of connections. A really, visionary guy, Tom Linehan, was hired at the time in 2002 to really spearhead the creation of this overlap of arts, humanities, science, and technology. And that program became so successful as far as enrollment and everything was concerned that there was a sense, roughly 10 years ago, that it needed to become its own school. So
Right.
at that point, there was a separate school that kind of split from Arts and Humanities called ATech, because there seemed, the only way to let it go and do everything it was meant to do was really to be by itself. But then more lately, a couple of years ago, there was a sense that with the other growth on campus, that having two schools with arts in their titles was really fragmenting our presence in the arts, and was really not helping either one of the schools. And therefore, there was a thought putting them back together, as, at a time when also the university put so much emphasis now behind the creation of the arts and performance complex to kind of unite the forces, so to speak, and bring more focus to the presence of arts and the humanities on a very STEM-heavy campus. We were founded by Texas Instruments.
Right. So when you're talking to parents or students, what do you tell them are the key points of the Bass School?
So there are obviously many. The most critical one is that we are a school that introduces students to wide-ranging opportunities of learning. So in terms of disciplines, we have the traditional humanities, we have the philosophers, we have the literature guys, we have the historians, we have the creative writers, but then we have on the other side also the arts performance, meaning theater, orchestra, band, visual arts, sculpture, and it goes on and on. And then on the other side, we have design and creative practice, which is kind of arts wrap more around technology, and then obviously our big animation and games program. So that's, if you think about curriculum, this is how, we built the school, that we have, designated BAs for these different programs and kind of designated faculty that owns and, kind of is in charge of these. But in between, we have endless amounts of opportunities to get really messy. And that's where the whole fun is, where, I think the students get the opportunity to learn about these disciplines, to embrace, let's say, literature. But if they want to, they can also create animation shorts or creative short stories or whatever they want. And I think there is really an opportunity for students, that come to us they don't necessarily all have their mapped out, career plans already in the back of their pockets. They have not figured out how the next 40 years of their life ought to look like. They're here to learn how to learn and how to be creative and innovative, and that's what we're about.
You're so enthusiastic for the kids, about the school, the Bass School, of course. What do you share to tell them why it's special to you?
Well, obviously, to me, it's special because it's a place that constantly evolves. I mean, we just talked a little bit about the history of the school, 1975, early 21st century, ATAC, then bringing it back together. But those are just really the big milestones. In between, in any given semester, there are a ton of things that are changing. So just right now, we are putting the finishing touches on bringing our sculpture back into this building. We have a vaulting shop. We have a spray painting booth. We have art studio spaces that we created just this semester. So this is a constantly changing entity. But I mean, in terms of overall impact, considering that we've been around that long, since 1975, we have had a steady production of students, obviously, over the years. And our students, just like most students from the university, have a tendency of lingering around in the Metroplex. Meaning over the years, there have been a steady influx of our graduates who are now having successful careers and lives in the Metroplex.
No, absolutely. Here's a question that I've always wondered. I've never really ever talked to anybody about it.
Bring it on.
Well, you're going to have the answer, I know. Colleges. What makes Stanford or Harvard or UT Dallas, how do they get, what is it that says these are the elite? I mean, it seems like everybody at every college you're taught information. What separates the schools?
Well, it's obviously a long-standing track record. So the kind of rankings are made out of the profile of the students, their graduation rates, their successes thereafter, the amount of prestige that the faculty collects, external funding that comes in. Size is another kind of thing that matters because you can only really bring, kind of pump up volume to really register if you have a certain size. So lots of things that come into it. But excellency is also measured in other ways, not just in these kind of rankings. And some of these rankings are a little bit more real than others. So I think, there's another way of also measuring our success, and that is we're constantly growing and getting better at it.
Right. So they do follow the students after school.
Yeah. We have all of the universities have pretty good data in terms of what their graduates end up doing, what their average income is, after 1 year, after 2 years, after 5 years. So there's,
and that all goes into
data.
it. So I guess you ever use the kids for recruiting purposes? Like, do you say to somebody who's successful, could you come speak to a graduating class for us?
Yeah, obviously, what we call alumni engagement is really important. We have a beautiful alumni center just around the building here. Staying close to them, in particular, since most of them, about 2/3 of universities' alums are really in the Metroplex. So engaging them is important. Also as a way of convincing, other students, because at this point, alums at times are the parents of our freshmen. And so as long as we kind of engage that community, we do really, really well.
Right. What drives a student to arts, humanities, and technology? What is it that, they're sitting at home? What drives them to that
I think
school?
Probably a great deal of curiosity. I think entering an arts, humanities, technology school is probably requires someone who is curious about themselves and very curious about the world and has a certain kind of sense of adventure maybe about all of that behind them, and is less, at this point already wedded to one particular idea of themselves and their future. If you would be that, then more likely you would go for something which is kind of more a professional degree or more clearly prepared career path, engineering or business or any of those other schools.
The other day, you and I were on the phone, and you made a comment to me. You said, "Are you nervous now?"
I was nervous.
No, you made a comment to me, and you said, "Scott, do you know that painting is a powerful research tool?" Now, I know my silence probably matched the blank stare I had, going, "What?"
Well, that's an interesting one. Let's. And this
well, let me carry it out further.
All right.
So I mentioned it to my wife, and she said, immediately, oh, ask them about the hieroglyphics in Egyptian tombs, because they painted their life stories inside the tombs, I guess. So
back to
that's where it started.
Let's maybe, so I think when we think about research in our culture, we have a tendency of always thinking immediately about someone in a white coat who's in some lab or another mixing this or that, or someone who's discovering something that had never been found before.
Right.
And that narrows really research in a particular way. In our mind, research is not just about finding things or unearthing things or mixing them and making them do new things, nor is research solely about solving problems. Research is about reinterpreting things. It's about communicating things. It's about engagement as well. And I think if you go to another way of thinking about knowledge, let's go, you and I could just for a moment jump on Google Earth and travel, let's say, to the Library of Congress and look at the ceiling and the paintings. Then you would see it's not just scientists who are there. There are poets there, musicians, architects. Everyone is there because all collectively at that point were believed to have produced what we call knowledge. And I think we all collectively participate that.
Well, let's even
So research, in other words, is not just discovery but it's really interpreting as well.
Let's delve into it, though. Painting can bring emotions and, talk about communities and everything. How do researchers, analyze it? And is the artist, when they're painting something, are they thinking about that? Or are they just going, this is a great picture I'm painting? What is their thought in all of it?
So I think it differs. I mean, there's not one artist, that all go about it in different ways. But I think if you just think on the one side that, science has been all about understanding what's out there, right? And understanding how it works and measuring it and quantifying it, seeing how it interacts. Then the arts and humanities are partly about that as well, but partly also about that other really groovy world, and that is us, right? The inside of us. And we know that our inside is about as exciting and as diverse and messed up and confusing and exciting as the world is there that is outside of that. And so who's the researcher of the us? Right. And I think that's us, meaning the arts and humanities, who are engaging in those questions and are trying also to communicate that with others. So how do they go about it? We have a drawing room here. Do they come in with their little cliff notes and say, I'm going to use blue, and then I'm going to use orange, and then I'm going to do this? No, I think there's something in the creative process that takes over at some point. For as long as you're staying in that mapped out world, you're probably only at the beginning. And at some point, the process takes over. And you'll be taken to places that you probably didn't anticipate. And you'll hopefully be surprised by what comes out there and then look back again and then reassess. So it's very iterative.
How does art help in a community? In doing my research, they talk about painting helps communities come together and whatnot. How are all these things happening? People aren't even aware of it with how they're being affected by art.
So art, it affects us in multiple ways. The very way how we see, for example, is informed by art. It's informed by photos. Photos are informed by visual arts. So in our culture, there's a particular way how we see, how we interpret, and that goes all the way down to how we make sense out of what is on our little screen these days, as well as how we make sense out of what is on the big billboards along our highways. So the whole visual language it doesn't come from nowhere, but comes from a certain tradition about how pictures are arranged, how they narrate a particular kind of view, story, and how we make sense out of that. We are trained on making sense of these things by our culture and by our traditional viewing.
And I also saw that they said cognitive growth and help, for children comes through art. How are they deciding?
That's an interesting one. There's a lot of interesting work, has been done over the last 40, 50 years. And if you look at, the thing that bounds us in the school is what we call creativity. And we have shirts that, we hand out, that creativity takes courage and so on and so forth, because we think creativity is about innovation. But if you look at some of the studies, they seem to suggest that we are all innately born with creativity. We are just unfortunately unlearning it, and we're unlearning it at such rapid pace that by the age of 15 or 16, it has come down significantly. And I think part of maybe what the school does is to kind of try to reignite that really powerful
right.
engine that we call creativity and innovation.
Are you able to tell in a classroom if there's a student that you're trying to get it out of them, that you think there's something there that they don't know how to express?
I think that goes to all of them. Some though are more readily, there already. Some are traveling other ways. Some go straight. Some go segues. And I think as a teacher, you're kind of trying to create an environment where ideally everyone in their own ways can come to it. I mean, that's, I think, one of the other big, wrong ideas about education, that we can kind of have this predictor and that every student's experience is linear in exactly the same manner. I mean, I don't know about your education, but I was going slow sometimes, and then I was going fast, and then I was going sideways, and then I was going in circles in my education. But it was most clearly not, one where I looked over my shoulder, my friends were there, I looked 10 years later, we were all moving in the same direction.
Right.
It's changes, it's messy and should be.
Do scientists ever collaborate with artists then?
Oh yeah, we have quite a few, and we have quite a few interesting projects when it comes to visualizing science, for example, science projects. I mean, the problem that scientists have these days is, let's be honest, most of us don't understand what they're talking about, right? And so they have to have ways how to tell their stories.
Right. What do they do with the data? Does it come back to universities?
So we had like an interesting project a little over a year ago, which was actually hosted at the Eisman Center, which was an attempt to visualize data that had been collected about space and to visualize it, because the data comes in ways that you and I cannot see or make sense, but how can we visualize it and make it accessible now to wider audiences? So that was kind of the attempt of that project to create an immersive environment that projected some of this data in visuals and in sound as well.
Right. When we go to an art gallery or something, people look at paintings and go, I don't get it.
Yeah.
How do the average guy get over the hump to understand what's going on when they're looking at a painting? Because, a lot of people go, oh, wow, that looks perfect. That, there's a lady, a dog, and a child. It's great. It looks exactly like them. And then there's a painting that's kind of just painted on and different things. How do we know what's going on?
So, the question is, first of all, why is it that people struggle in front of art? And I think there are probably a number of answers. One is that they're uncomfortable because they don't know what to do. They are more trained to produce answers to very specific questions, but not to be in front of something where it's not entirely clear what is expected of them. So by default, they'll be reproducing the Wikipedia entry. If they see the painting, they know the artist, they're going to tell you when he or she was born, what this painting is about. But I think it goes to a bigger question, and that is, we're so inundated with images these days, probably more than ever, right?
Right.
But does that mean that our ability to see is actually been increased? And I think one of the kind of challenges that we have is that in order to make sense out of painting, you actually have to look. And you actually have to look for a little longer. And you also have to kind of get out of your own way in terms of thinking that you know what you're looking at.
Right,
and so you have to develop a certain curiosity.
So
the question is not so much, whether we have knowledge or not, but whether we're willing actually to see.
Is there a right or wrong? I mean, like if I look at a painting, you look at a painting, and we come away with different thoughts and ideas. Is there a correct one, or is it a personal
I don't think
thing?
ultimately, there's obviously, as far as teaching art history is concerned, there'll be, maybe a sense of, trying to understand them within the context of their time, the kind of artistic ideals and so on, the composition. But I think as far as a visitor in a museum is concerned, I think insofar as they take something from that encounter, I think that's valuable.
So does an artist, when they first start, as a young kid, start painting, are they just trying to paint a picture, or are they allowed to express their thoughts? How do you work with little kids? I'm not saying, obviously, we don't have little kids here, but, what are they taught at a young age if they think somebody has some talent? Are they to express themselves, or are they to paint that picture, copy this picture and paint?
Well, I mean, some of the critics these days of education would argue that we're trying to make everyone too much do, not to express themselves, but rather to say, okay, can you paint this?
Right,
And then we're judging them by the degree by which they capture this.
Right,
And then
right.
that, in lots of ways, reduces really the willingness for kids to express themselves in their own unique ways, because they early on start to understand that school is not about that. School is about producing something that's more measurable and quantifiable, and that kind of kills a little bit the spirit of creativity, doesn't it?